The year was 1887, and the Arizona Territory remained as unforgiving as it was breathtaking. Beneath a vast turquoise sky that seemed to touch every horizon, the remote homestead of Sarah Mitchell stood alone against the elements, a solitary outpost of civilization in a land that resisted taming. What most considered an impossible place to survive, a harsh landscape where dreams withered under the merciless sun, had become Sarah's desperate refuge, a place where she could finally escape the shadows that had followed her from Boston. But on that fateful autumn evening, when an injured Navajo elder collapsed at her doorstep, Sarah couldn't have known that her act of compassion would forever alter the delicate balance between two worlds. Or that 1 week later, as dawn broke over the mesas, she would find herself surrounded by the elders' tribe, their intentions as unclear as the fate that awaited her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The southwest wind carried the scent of sage and impending rain across the high desert plateau, finding every gap in Sarah Mitchell's modest adobe homestead. Inside, she huddled closer to the iron stove, her calloused hands wrapped around a steaming cup of chicory coffee. 3 years she had been here, though sometimes it seemed like a lifetime. 3 years of coaxing stubborn crops from reluctant soil, of startling at unfamiliar sounds in the night, of learning to read the land's warnings in shifting clouds and animal behavior. She'd once been Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell of Philadelphia, daughter of Judge William Mitchell, educated at prestigious female academies, destined for a respectable marriage and a life of quiet luxury. Now she was simply Sarah, a homesteader with 30 acres of hard-won land that most locals had wagered she wouldn't survive a season on. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her father had spent his career dispensing justice from the comfort of mahogany-paneled courtrooms, while his daughter now answered only to the harsh justice of the Arizona wilderness. The small window beside her door framed a landscape turning golden in the late afternoon sun. In the distance, the sacred mountains of the Navajo people dominated the horizon, their red and purple shadows lengthening with the day's end. Sarah had learned to respect those mountains and the people who considered them the boundary posts of their homeland. She'd also learned to keep her distance. Relations between settlers and the tribes remained unpredictable at best, openly hostile at worst. A sudden sound outside, the distinct shuffle of footsteps on loose gravel, sent her heart racing. Sarah set down her cup and reached for the Winchester rifle that was never far from her grasp. Homesteading alone as a woman had taught her to treat every unexpected visitor as a potential threat until proven otherwise. Moving silently to the window, she peered through the gap in the rough cotton curtains. The fading light revealed a figure, slumped against her garden fence, an elderly man in traditional Navajo clothing, his silver-streaked hair bound in the traditional way, his face etched with pain. Blood darkened the fabric at his side. For a long moment, Sarah remained frozen in indecision. The nearest town was 20 miles away. The nearest neighbor, the cantankerous Thomas Reynolds, was 5 miles east and no friend to the native tribes. Every instinct honed during her years in this unforgiving territory told her to bar her door, to wait until the man either recovered enough to move on or... She pushed the thought away. "Damn it all," she whispered, setting the rifle down but keeping it within reach. Her father had raised her with strict moral principles, even if he hadn't always lived by them himself. She couldn't leave a wounded man to die on her doorstep, regardless of the risks. The wooden door creaked in protest as she pushed it open, the cooling evening air rushing in. The elder's eyes, dark and deeply lined at the corners, fixed on her immediately, his gaze surprisingly alert despite his obvious distress. "Water," he said in English, accented but clear. Please. Sarah hesitated only briefly before returning to fetch her canteen. The man drank slowly when she held it to, his lips' dignity evident in every careful movement, despite his condition. You're hurt, she said unnecessarily, eyeing the wound at his side. I should get you inside before the temperature drops. No safe, he replied, attempting to push himself upright and wincing with the effort. Bad men follow, bluecoats and others, Sarah's breath caught. Soldiers. Why would soldiers be after you? The elder shook his head slightly. I am Ashki Yazi, medicine man of Dine, what you call Navajo. I go to sacred place for healing plants. Cross boundary where they say, my people cannot go now. Sarah understood immediately. The recently established reservation boundaries restricted traditional Navajo movements, cutting them off from ancestral sites they had visited for generations. A medicine man venturing beyond those boundaries to gather traditional healing plants would indeed attract unwanted military attention. How badly are you hurt? She asked, already calculating the risks of helping him versus turning him away. Ashki pulled back his blanket to reveal a bullet wound in his side, not immediately life-threatening but serious enough to prevent travel. Soldier shoot. I hide. In canyon, then walk many miles. Your place only light I see. The prudent choice was clear. Help him enough to move on and deny ever seeing him if questioned later. But something in the elder's dignified bearing, in the wisdom evident in his weathered face, stirred something in Sarah. Perhaps it was recognition of another soul who understood what it meant to be displaced from everything familiar. Can you stand with help? She asked, decision made. I need to get you inside and treat that wound before infection sets in. With considerable effort and muffled groans of pain, Sarah managed to help Ashki into her home and onto the narrow bed she normally occupied. The bullet had passed through his side, a fortunate circumstance that spared her the dangerous task of extraction. Still, the wound needed cleaning and binding to prevent the infection that killed far more often than the initial injury in this harsh country. As Sarah heated water and gathered what medical supplies she had, the absurdity of her situation wasn't lost on her. She had fled to this remote corner of the Arizona Territory to escape her past, to avoid drawing attention that might lead her father's agents to her doorstep. Now she was harboring a Navajo elder being pursued by military forces, an act that could result in serious consequences from both American authorities and potentially the Navajo tribe itself if they misinterpreted her actions. Your people will be looking for you, she said, as she carefully cleaned the wound with carbolic acid. A precious commodity, she'd traded 3 hand-sewn quilts for the last time a traveling merchant passed through. Ashki's face remained impassive, despite what must have been considerable pain. My son rides to sacred mountains for ceremony, will not return for 7 days, others not know where I go. So no one will come looking for you, Sarah clarified, both relieved and concerned by this information. No come before I heal, he confirmed. If I not return when expected, then they search. Sarah nodded, focusing on binding the wound with strips of clean cotton. 7 days. She could shelter the elder for a week, give him time to heal enough to return to his people. It was a risk, but one her conscience wouldn't allow her to avoid. As she worked, Ashki studied her face with surprising intensity. You have healer. Hands, he observed, steady, gentle, but eyes carry much shadow. You run from something, yes? Sarah's hands stilled momentarily before continuing their work. We all have our reasons for being where we are, she replied carefully. Rest now. We'll talk more when you're stronger. Ashki nodded slightly, seeming to accept her non-answer. Shadow follows until you face it, he said enigmatically, before closing his eyes. Like coyote chasing own tail, never catching, always running. Sarah finished binding his wound in silence, troubled by the elder's perceptiveness. She had spent 3 years building a new identity in this harsh landscape, reinventing herself as a capable, independent homesteader with no connection to her former life. Yet this stranger had seen through her careful facade. Within minutes, as darkness enveloped the small homestead, Sarah settled into the wooden chair beside the stove, rifle across her lap, preparing for a night of watchfulness. Outside, the desert. Wind picked up, carrying the first drops of rain and whispering secrets across the land. In the distance, coyotes began their nightly chorus, their eerie calls seeming to echo Ashki's words. The shadow follows until you face it. Sarah rapped, her shawl tighter around her shoulders, fighting a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night. Whatever consequences might come from her decision to help the Navajo elder, she had made her choice. For the first time in years, she had followed her conscience rather than her fear. What she couldn't know, as she maintained her vigil through that long night, was that her act of compassion had set in motion events that would soon bring her face to face with both Ashki's people and the shadows of her own past. A reckoning that would arrive with the dawn exactly 1 week later. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dawn broke hesitantly over the mesas, pale light filtering through the single window of Sarah's homestead. She hadn't meant to doze, but exhaustion had claimed her sometime in the early morning hours. Now, jerking awake in the wooden chair, her neck stiff and her Winchester still balanced across her lap, Sarah's first instinct was to check on her. Unexpected patient, Ashki lay still on her narrow bed, his breathing shallow but steady. The fever she'd feared hadn't materialized overnight. A small mercy in a situation that offered few. Moving quietly, Sarah stoked the dying embers in the stove and set water to boil for a medicinal tea of yarrow and sage she'd learned to prepare from an old Mexican woman in town. As she worked, her mind cycled through the potential consequences of her decision. If soldiers were indeed searching for Ashki, they might eventually track him to her homestead. Harboring a Navajo who had violated reservation boundaries was punishable by fine or worse. The Indian agent Hammond was notoriously harsh in enforcing the government's policies designed to confine and ultimately break the spirit of the native peoples. "You think loud thoughts," Ashki observed, his voice startling her from her ruminations. His dark eyes were open now, alert despite the pain evident in the tight lines around his mouth. Sarah brought him a cup of water, helping him raise his head slightly to drink. "How are you feeling?" "I live," he replied simply, "thanks to you. The wound doesn't show signs of infection, but you've lost blood and need rest." She hesitated before adding, "If soldiers are looking for you, this is the first homestead they'll come across when searching this area." Ashki nodded slightly. 2 days I can move, return to my people." "Your injury needs longer than that to heal properly," Sarah protested. A ghost of a smile touched the elder's lips. "My medicine's at home, strong healing, but need strength to travel back." Sarah pulled up her chair beside the bed, curiosity overcoming caution. "You said you were gathering healing plants when you were shot. What kind of plants?" "Sacred herbs, grow only on mountain where ancestors' spirits dwell." His expression grew distant. "Government men draw lines on paper, say we cannot cross. But plants do not know these lines. Sickness does not respect these boundaries." The bitterness in his voice resonated with something deep inside Sarah. She too understood the arbitrary nature of boundaries, defined by those in power, how they could suddenly transform a person's entire existence. "My people suffer sickness brought by white man," Ashki continued after a moment. "Children cough blood, elders waste away. Agency doctor has no medicine that helps, so I go to mountain for old remedies." "And that's when the soldiers found you?" Ashki nodded. Patrol with Indian police. They shoot first, ask no questions. The Indian police, native men recruited to enforce government policies against their own people. The practice was as clever as it was cruel, using tribal members to maintain control while creating division within the communities themselves. "Yet you speak English well," Sarah observed. "Mission school as boy," he explained, his expression darkening. "They take Navajo children, cut hair, change names, beat us for speaking our language." He met her gaze directly. "I learn their words to understand their ways, to protect my people." Sarah felt a flush of shame, not for herself specifically, but for the system she was unavoidably part of. "I'm sorry," she said, knowing the inadequacy of the words even as she spoke them. Ashki studied her face. "You different. Eyes see truth, while you live alone in desert far from your kind." The question hit uncomfortably close to the truth Sarah had been running from. For a moment, she considered offering the same vague response she'd given the previous night, but something about the elder's direct gaze encouraged honesty. "I'm hiding," she admitted, perhaps the first time she'd spoken the words aloud since arriving in the territory. "From my father. From a life I couldn't live anymore." "What? Life makes daughter run from father?" Ashki asked, his tone not judgmental but genuinely curious. Sarah moved to the window, looking out at the desert landscape that had become her sanctuary. The story she'd kept locked inside for 3 years suddenly demanded release. "My father is a federal judge in Philadelphia, powerful, respected, and corrupt." The words came easier than she'd expected. "He sentenced men to prison for bribes, sent innocent people to jail to protect his wealthy friends. When I discovered evidence of what he was doing, ledgers recording payments, names, dates, he arranged a marriage for me to one of his associates, a man 40 years my senior." Ashki listened silently, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "I refused," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger with the telling. "My father locked me in my room, said I would comply or be committed to an asylum for female hysteria. That night I took the ledgers and fled. I had a friend help me secure this land claim, far from his influence." She turned back to face Ashki. "So you see, I understand something about arbitrary boundaries and unjust power." The elder nodded slowly. "Two people, different worlds, same story. Both run from those who would cage the spirit." His eyes held a knowing gleam. "But running never ends chase. Shadow follows." Sarah returned to her chair, suddenly exhausted despite the early hour. "What choice do I have? If I were to expose my father's corruption, his influence would ensure I was discredited, perhaps even imprisoned. The ledgers are my only leverage, my only protection." "Where are these paper talks now?" Ashki asked. "Hidden," Sarah replied, "buried beneath the floor of my root cellar." A sound outside, the distant whinny of a horse, cut their conversation short. Sarah was instantly alert, moving to the window. With practiced silence, in the distance, a cloud of dust marked the approach of riders, still too far to identify. "Someone's coming," she said, anxiety sharpening her voice. 3 riders, maybe 4. Ashki attempted to rise, but fell back with a grimace of pain. "Help me hide," he urged. "Cannot be found here." Sarah quickly assessed her limited options. The homestead consisted of just the main room and a small attached storage space that served as both pantry and root cellar. There were few hiding places for a grown man, injured or not. "The cellar," she decided, moving to roll back the rag rug that concealed the trapdoor in the corner. The space below was shallow, barely 4 feet deep, but it was the only option. "Can you move with help?" With considerable effort and muffled sounds of pain, Sarah managed to help Ashki down the rough-hewn ladder into the earth-floored cellar. She passed down blankets and a canteen of water, then paused, struck by a sudden thought. "Wait," she whispered, hurrying to retrieve her father's ledgers from their hiding place beneath a loose stone. She wrapped the incriminating books in oilcloth and pressed them into Ashki's hands. "If anything happens to me, these contain proof of corruption that goes beyond my father, to territorial officials, even military commanders in this region. Your people might find them useful in their dealings with the government." Something like respect flickered in the elder's eyes as he tucked the package inside his blanket. "Medicine woman has wisdom beyond her years," he said softly. Sarah replaced the trapdoor and rug, then hurried to eliminate any signs of her patient. She bundled the blood-stained bandages into the stove, straightened the bedding, and positioned her chair naturally beside the fireplace instead of next to the bed. By the time she'd finished, the riders were close enough that she could hear the creak of saddle leather. Through the window, she identified the approaching men, and her heart sank. Lieutenant James Foster of Fort Defiance led the party, flanked by a uniformed corporal and two men in civilian clothing with the unmistakable bearing of Indian police. Foster was known throughout the territory for his harsh enforcement of reservation boundaries and his contempt for both the native peoples and the settlers who showed them any sympathy. Sarah smoothed her hair, pinched color into her pale cheeks, and opened the door before they could knock. "Better to appear cooperative than defensive. Lieutenant Foster," she called, stepping onto her small porch. "What brings the army to my doorstep so early in the day?" Foster reined his horse to a stop, his expression revealing nothing beneath. The brim of his cavalry hat. He was a handsome man, in the conventional sense, with sharp features and intelligent eyes that missed little. Those eyes had looked at Sarah with interest during his infrequent visits to town, an interest she had consistently rebuffed. "Miss Mitchell," he replied with cool formality, "we're tracking a Navajo man who crossed reservation boundaries 2 days ago. Medicine man, elderly. He was wounded while resisting arrest and has evaded capture since." His gaze swept past her to the homestead's single window. "Given your isolated position, we thought it prudent to check if you've seen anything unusual." The implication was clear. Her remote location made her vulnerable, a fact Foster had commented on during previous encounters. His concern, however, always carried an undertone that suggested she would be safer under male protection, preferably his. "I appreciate your concern, Lieutenant, but I haven't seen anyone," Sarah replied, evenly. Navajo or otherwise, Foster studied her face with uncomfortable intensity. "Mind if we take a look around? For your safety, of course. Wounded men can be desperate." Sarah felt her mouth go dry, but maintained her composure. "Of course," she said, stepping aside, "though there's not much to see." As Foster dismounted, he signaled for the Indian police to circle the homestead while he and the corporal approached the door. Sarah led them inside with a calm she didn't feel, silently praying that Ashki would remain absolutely quiet in his hiding place. "Cozy," Foster remarked, his eyes taking in every detail of her sparse living quarters. "You've made quite a home here, Miss Mitchell. Most women wouldn't attempt such an independent lifestyle." "I've never aspired to be like most women, Lieutenant," Sarah replied, moving to the stove as if to tend it, positioning herself between the men and the concealed trapdoor in the corner. The corporal made a perfunctory circuit of the room while Foster lingered, watching Sarah with that same unsettling intensity. His gaze eventually settled on the bed, where a single dark smudge of blood had escaped Sarah's hasty cleaning. "Hurt yourself recently?" he asked casually, though his eyes had narrowed. Sarah didn't miss a beat. "Butchering a rabbit yesterday. I'm afraid housekeeping suffers when you're doing everything alone." A commotion outside saved her from further questioning. One of the Indian police appeared at the door, holding the reins of a paint horse Sarah had never seen before. "Found this hidden in the wash behind the homestead, sir. Navajo saddle blanket, blood on the mane." Sarah's heart sank as Foster's expression hardened from suspicion to certainty. The elder must have managed to conceal his horse before collapsing at her doorstep, a detail he hadn't shared, and one that now threatened them both. "Search the property thoroughly," Foster ordered, his hand moving to rest on the revolver at his hip as he turned back to Sarah. "It seems we have more to discuss, Miss Mitchell." "Lieutenant, I can explain," Sarah began, her mind racing to construct a plausible story that wouldn't endanger either herself or the injured man hidden beneath her floorboards. Foster's expression had transformed completely, the polite veneer replaced by cold authority. "I'm sure you can, Miss Mitchell. Women often have creative explanations when caught in deception." The condescension in his tone sparked a flare of anger that momentarily overpowered Sarah's fear. She drew herself up, meeting his gaze directly. "That horse could have wandered here from anywhere. The Navajo graze their herds throughout this region, despite your arbitrary boundaries." "Arbitrary?" Foster's eyebrows rose. "Those boundaries are federal law, Miss Mitchell. Laws that maintain order and protect settlers like yourself from savages who'd as soon scalp you as look at you." Sarah bit back a sharper retort, reminding herself that antagonizing the lieutenant would only make matters worse. "I meant no disrespect to the law, Lieutenant. I merely suggested that a stray horse doesn't prove anything about my actions." The corporal had begun methodically searching the cabin, moving aside furniture and checking the walls for any sign of concealment. Sarah watched with growing dread as he approached the corner where the root cellar lay hidden beneath the rug. "Sir," the younger man called, noticing the edges of the trapdoor beneath the worn fabric. "There's something here." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "That's my root cellar," she said quickly, "for storing vegetables through winter. Every homestead has one." Foster moved to stand beside the corporal, watching as the man pulled back the rug to reveal the wooden door set into the floor. "Open it," he ordered. "Lieutenant, this is still my home," Sarah protested, stepping forward only to find her path blocked by Foster's outstretched arm. "A home where you're harboring a fugitive in violation of federal law," he countered. "That forfeits certain courtesies." "Miss Mitchell." The corporal lifted the trapdoor, and Foster drew his revolver before peering into the darkness below. For a moment, absolute silence filled the cabin. Then Foster looked up at Sarah, confusion evident in his expression. "Empty," he said. The corporal lowered himself partially into the opening, holding a lantern to illuminate the earthen space. "Nothing here, sir. Just some preserves and a few sacks of potatoes." Relief washed through Sarah so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled. Somehow, impossibly, Ashki had vanished from the cellar where she had hidden him not 10 minutes earlier. Foster holstered his weapon, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "Search outside again," he instructed the corporal. "Check every outbuilding, every wash within half a mile. He can't have gotten far if he's injured." As the corporal departed, Foster closed the distance between himself and Sarah. "I don't know how you've managed to conceal him, or why you would risk everything to help a Navajo criminal, but I advise you to reconsider your position. Harboring fugitives carries serious consequences, consequences that would be particularly difficult for a woman alone in this territory." The threat beneath his words was unmistakable. Sarah held her ground, though it took every ounce of her will to meet his penetrating gaze. "I've told you the truth, Lieutenant. There's no one here but me." Foster studied her for a long moment before a cold smile touched his lips. "For now, perhaps I'll accept that answer, but understand this. I'll be watching this homestead. If the medicine man contacts you, if you see any sign of him, it would be in your best interest to notify me immediately." He removed his glove and reached out to touch her cheek, a gesture that made Sarah's skin crawl. "I would hate to see someone of your quality suffer the consequences of misplaced sympathies." Sarah remained perfectly still until he withdrew his hand. "I understand perfectly, Lieutenant." "I doubt that," he replied. But you will, should it become necessary. The search of Sarah's property continued for another hour, the Indian police methodically covering every possible hiding place while Foster remained inside, ostensibly to ensure Sarah didn't attempt to signal any hidden accomplices. His presence filled the small space, a constant reminder of the precarious position in which she found herself. When the searchers finally reported finding nothing, Foster appeared genuinely perplexed. "He was here," he said, more to himself than to Sarah. "The horse, the blood." His gaze swept the cabin once more. "Somehow, you've helped him escape. Or perhaps he was never here at all," Sarah suggested, unable to resist the small defiance. Foster donned his hat, fixing her with a final cold stare. "For your sake, Miss Mitchell, I hope that proves true. We'll be patrolling this area regularly. If I find evidence you've lied to me today, my return visit will be far less cordial." Only when the riders had disappeared over the ridge did Sarah allow herself to collapse into her chair, trembling with the aftermath of fear and relief. Where was Ash Key? How had he managed to vacate the cellar without being discovered? More importantly, where were her father's ledgers now? The answer to her first question came sooner than expected. As twilight descended on the homestead, Sarah was startled by a soft scratching at her back door, the one that opened toward the small vegetable garden she had painstakingly coaxed from the arid soil. Rifle in hand, she approached cautiously. "Who's there?" "Friend," came the whispered response in a voice she recognized. Sarah quickly unbarred the door to find not Ashki himself, but a young Navajo man crouched in the shadows of her garden wall. He couldn't have been more than 20, with the same proud bearing as the elder, but with strength and vitality that Ashki currently lacked. "Who are you?" Sarah demanded, not lowering her rifle. "Where is Ashki?" "I am Ki Yazi," the young man replied in careful English. "Ashki is my grandfather. He is safe." His dark eyes assessed her with the same penetrating quality the elder had shown. "You helped him when others would not. Our people remember such debts." "How did you find him? How did you get him out of my cellar without the soldiers seeing you?" A slight smile touched Key's lips. "Our people have traversed these lands for generations. We know ways of moving unseen when necessary." He gestured toward the distant mesas. "There are passages beneath the earth that your people have never discovered. One such passage opens near your water storage." Sarah recalled the small cistern she had dug at the garden's edge to collect precious rainwater. She had never noticed any opening that might connect to underground passages. "That's impossible," she began, then stopped herself. Was it any more impossible than Ashki's disappearance from a sealed cellar with soldiers just feet away? "Many things outsiders call impossible are simply unknown to them," Key observed. "Grandfather sent me to return this." He extended his hand, offering a small leather pouch that Sarah recognized as her own, one she kept herbs in for cooking. Inside, she found a folded piece of paper covered in unfamiliar symbols, and beneath it a small carved stone in the shape of an eagle. The stone was warm to the touch despite the cool evening air. "What does this mean?" she asked, studying the intricate carving. "The eagle watches over those who show courage and honor," Key explained. "Grandfather says it will guard your dreams until he returns to thank you properly." He glanced toward the horizon. "He also says to move what is hidden under your floor. Soldiers will return. Search more thoroughly next time." Sarah clutched the stone tightly. "The ledgers, are they safe?" Key nodded. "Grandfather keeps them protected, says they may help both our peoples against those who abuse power." He rose, silently, preparing to disappear into the gathering darkness. "I must return before I am missed, but know that eyes watch over you now. You are not alone." Before Sarah could respond, he had melted into the shadows with a stealth that seemed nearly supernatural to her Eastern sensibilities. For several minutes, She stood in her doorway, staring at the empty landscape, wondering if the entire exchange had been a stress-induced hallucination. The eagle stone in her palm, however, was undeniably real, as was the warning about Foster's inevitable return. That night, Sarah worked by lantern light to relocate her few valuables from the root cellar to a new hiding place she constructed beneath the hearthstones. As she worked, her mind kept returning to Key's words, "Eyes watch over you now. You are not alone." After 3 years of isolation, of trusting no one, the idea that unknown eyes watched her homestead should have been terrifying. Instead, she found it oddly comforting. Somewhere in the vastness of the territory, Ashki was recovering among his people, the evidence against her father secure in his keeping. For the first time since fleeing Philadelphia, Sarah had allies, however unexpected. She slept that night, with the eagle stone beneath her pillow, her dreams untroubled by the anxieties that had plagued her since Foster's visit. In the morning, she began her chores with renewed purpose, keeping a watchful eye on the horizon for returning soldiers, but no longer paralyzed by the fear of discovery. 3 days passed without incident. Sarah maintained her usual routines, tending her garden, caring for her small flock of chickens and single milk cow, repairing the endless small damages that the harsh desert environment inflicted on her homestead. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of movement at the edge of her property, a shadow that didn't match the surrounding landscape, a flash of color among the scrub brush that vanished when she looked directly at it. The promised watchful eyes. She assumed, though she never approached these manifestations nor acknowledged them openly. On the 4th day, as Sarah returned from the small spring that supplied her drinking water, she noticed fresh hoofprints crossing her property, not the military-precise tracks of cavalry mounts, but the unshod prints of Navajo ponies. They led directly to her back door and then circled the homestead before disappearing toward the western mesas. On her doorstep lay a small bundle wrapped in hand-woven cloth. Inside, Sarah found dried herbs that gave off an aromatic scent she didn't recognize, and a portion of what appeared to be bread made from unfamiliar blue cornmeal. A gift of thanks, perhaps, or a gesture of alliance. Sarah brought the offerings inside, placing the herbs carefully in her cabinet of medicinal supplies and breaking off a piece of the bread to taste. Its nutty flavor was unlike anything she had encountered before, but pleasant in its unfamiliarity. She was about to close her door when a distant dust cloud caught her attention, riders approaching from the east, from the direction of Fort Defiance. Foster had returned as predicted, likely with more men and a more thorough search plan. Sarah quickly secured her home, ensuring no trace of the Navajo gifts remained visible, then waited on her porch, a posture of innocence that belied the apprehension coursing through her. As the riders drew closer, however, Sarah realized this was not Foster's patrol returning. Instead of uniformed cavalry, these riders wore civilian clothing, though they moved with the coordinated precision of men accustomed to working together. At their head rode a figure Sarah recognized with a shock that turned her blood to ice: Thomas Blackwell, her father's most trusted investigator, the man who had tracked down countless fugitives for Judge Mitchell over the years. Her past had found her at last, and at the worst possible moment, caught between Lieutenant Foster's suspicions and her tenuous new alliance with Ashki's people. As Blackwell's party approached, Sarah felt the weight of the eagle stone in her pocket, a small comfort against the reckoning that now loomed before her. Sarah's fingers tightened around the porch railing as Blackwell reined his horse to a stop before her homestead. Time had added silver to his temples and deepened the lines around his eyes, but his hawk-like features remained unchanged. The same calculating gaze she remembered from Philadelphia society functions where he had hovered at her father's shoulder, watching, assessing, quietly gathering information on anyone who might threaten Judge Mitchell's interests. "Miss Sarah," he called, removing his hat with a gentility that contrasted sharply with his reputation as her father's merciless enforcer. "It's been a long journey to find you." Sarah straightened her spine, refusing to show the fear that threatened to paralyze her. "Mr. Blackwell, my father must be desperate indeed to send you so far from civilization." A thin smile crossed Blackwell's weathered face. "Judge Mitchell has been concerned for your well-being. 3 years is a long time to worry about one's only daughter." "Concerned for his reputation, you mean?" Sarah replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Or for the ledgers I took with me?" Blackwell dismounted with the fluid grace of a man half his age, motioning for his 3 companions to remain on horseback. "May I approach, Miss Sarah? It seems we have much to discuss, and the desert sun is unforgiving to men who've ridden far." Sarah weighed her options quickly. Refusing him would only delay the inevitable confrontation and might prompt a forceful entry that would negate what little advantage her position as homeowner provided. "Better to maintain the illusion of control for as long as possible. You may approach, Mr. Blackwell, alone." She emphasized the last word, her gaze shifting pointedly to his armed companions. Blackwell nodded to his men, who remained mounted but watchful as he climbed the 3 steps to Sarah's porch. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in the set of his shoulders, the trail dust that coated his otherwise immaculate clothing. He had indeed ridden far and hard to find her. "You've built quite a life for yourself," he observed, glancing around at the modest but well-maintained homestead. "Most would have wagered against a judge's daughter surviving alone in such country." "Most would have lost that wager," Sarah replied evenly. "What does my father want, Mr. Blackwell? After disowning me so publicly, why track me down now?" Blackwell studied her face for a moment before answering. "Times change, Miss Sarah. Circumstances evolve. Your father faces political challenges. The return of his daughter and certain missing documents would simplify matters considerably." "Political challenges," Sarah repeated, a humorless laugh escaping her. "How diplomatic of you. Has someone finally questioned his rulings, or did one of his victims find the courage to speak out?" Senator Harrison's son was recently appointed to the Oversight Committee examining judicial conduct in the eastern districts. Blackwell explained, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. "The young man seems determined to make a name for himself by investigating allegations of impropriety. Your father thought it prudent to resolve any potential complications before testimony begins." Sarah absorbed this information with a mixture of vindication and apprehension. After years of operating with impunity, her father was finally facing scrutiny. Yet that same scrutiny had driven him to find her after 3 years of blessed anonymity. "And if I refuse to return?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Blackwell's expression remained pleasant, but his voice took on an edge of steel. "Judge Mitchell has arranged a full pardon for any indiscretions that might have precipitated your departure. However, should you prove uncooperative, he's prepared to pursue other legal avenues. Theft of judicial records carries significant penalties, Miss Sarah, as does falsifying court documents and accepting bribes," she countered. "Those ledgers weren't just evidence of my father's corruption. They implicated dozens of so-called respectable men." A flicker of genuine interest crossed Blackwell's face. "You still have them, then?" Sarah realized her mistake immediately. She'd revealed too much, allowing Blackwell to confirm what had previously been only her father's suspicion, that she had taken the ledgers rather than simply discovering them. "I have what I need to ensure my safety," she amended carefully. Blackwell smiled, the expression failing to reach his eyes. "I've always admired your intelligence, Miss Sarah. It's served you well, obviously." He gestured toward the homestead. "But intelligence should be tempered with practicality. This situation can resolve in one of 2 ways. You return voluntarily with the ledgers, or Or what, Mr. Blackwell? My father will have me forcibly removed? On what authority? This is Arizona territory, not Pennsylvania. His influence doesn't extend here. Doesn't it? Blackwell countered softly. Judge Mitchell has cultivated relationships far beyond Philadelphia, Miss Sarah. The territorial governor counts him as a personal friend. The Indian agent at Fort Defiance corresponded with him just last month regarding mutual acquaintances. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert breeze. Hammond, the Indian agent, reported directly to Lieutenant Foster. If her father truly had connections in the territorial government, her position was far more precarious than she had realized. I need time to consider my options, she said finally, fighting to keep her voice steady. Blackwell nodded, as if he had expected, no less. Of course, Judge Mitchell understands this is a significant decision. He authorized me to allow you 3 days for reflection. His gaze swept the surrounding landscape. My associates and I will establish camp by the creek to the south. Close, enough to provide protection should you need it, far enough to respect your privacy. Protection was the last thing Sarah believed Blackwell offered, but she recognized the implicit message. They would be watching, preventing any attempt at flight. 3 days, she agreed, having little choice in the matter. Blackwell replaced his hat with a small bow that bordered on mockery. Until then, Miss Sarah. He descended the steps and returned to his waiting men, issuing quiet instructions before the group rode toward the creek, visible in the distance. As their dust settled, Sarah's mind raced through the limited options before her. Blackwell's arrival had complicated an already dangerous situation. If Foster returned to continue his search for Ashki while Blackwell's men watched the homestead, she would be caught between two forces, each capable of destroying the life she had built. More concerning still was the implied connection between her father and the territorial authorities. If Judge Mitchell truly had influence with Hammond and Foster, then her tenuous alliance with Ashki's people might be her only remaining protection. The eagle stone weighed heavily in her pocket as Sarah entered her cabin and barred the door behind her. She placed it on the table, studying its intricate carving in the afternoon light filtering through her window. I need your guidance now more than ever, she whispered to the talisman, feeling foolish even as the words left her lips. To her astonishment, a shadow passed across the stone, not her own, but that of a bird gliding past her window. Sarah looked up in time to see a golden eagle soaring overhead, its massive wingspan casting a brief shadow over her homestead before it banked toward the western mesas where Ashki's people dwelled. Coincidence, she told herself firmly. Yet she couldn't dismiss the timing nor the strange sense of reassurance that washed over her as she watched the eagle disappear into the distance. With renewed determination, Sarah gathered paper and the precious pencil she reserved for important correspondence. If she had only 3 days before Blackwell demanded a decision, she would use them to reach out to the only allies available to her. Carefully, she sketched the scene outside her window, Blackwell's camp to the south, the military post to the east, her homestead in the center. Below this crude map, she wrote in clear, precise script, "My father's agent has found me. He demands the ledgers and my return within 3 days. Military still searches for Ashki. I am watched from all sides. If you receive this message, please advise." She had no certainty that Key or any of Ashki's people still watched her homestead, nor any way of knowing if such a message could reach the elder in his hiding place. Still, she had to try. Folding the paper carefully, Sarah placed it inside a small tin that had once held hard candies, now repurposed as a weatherproof container. As dusk approached, she ventured out to collect eggs from her small henhouse, taking a circuitous route that brought her near the cistern, where Key had implied an entrance to the underground passages existed. When certain she wasn't observed, Sarah knelt as if checking the water level and quickly tucked the tin into a crevice beneath the stone rim. "Please find it," she whispered to the gathering shadows. "Please understand." The next morning dawned. With an unusual meteorological event, fog shrouded the valley, reducing visibility to mere yards beyond Sarah's porch. She could barely make out the shapes of Blackwell's camp through the swirling mist, a rare blessing of concealment in a land typically defined by its harsh clarity. Sarah had just finished her morning chores when she noticed the tin had disappeared from its hiding place beside the cistern. In its place lay a single blue cornmeal cake, identical to the one she had received earlier. Heart pounding, she broke it open to find a small piece of paper hidden inside, covered in the same strange symbols she had seen on Ashki's previous message, but with one addition she could understand, a rough drawing of the full moon with 3 marks beneath it. 3 nights, she interpreted. Something would happen when the full moon rose 3 nights from now, the very night Blackwell's ultimatum expired. That afternoon, Lieutenant Foster returned with a larger contingent of soldiers and Indian police. Sarah watched from her porch as they approached, noting that Blackwell and his men had emerged from their camp to observe the military party with evident interest. The 2 groups converged at her homestead, Foster and Blackwell sizing each other up with the wariness of predators, encountering unexpected competition. Neither man seemed pleased by the other's presence. "Miss Mitchell," Foster greeted her stiffly, "I see you have visitors." "Mr. Blackwell represents my father's interests in a family matter," Sarah explained, keeping her voice neutral. "Lieutenant, Foster is searching for a fugitive from the reservation," she added for Blackwell's benefit. The 2 men exchanged measured nods, each clearly calculating how the other's presence affected their respective missions. Foster broke the silence first. "We've tracked the medicine man to this general area. My men will need to conduct another search of your property and the surrounding terrain." Blackwell stepped forward. "Judge Mitchell would be most concerned to hear his daughter's home has become a target of military interest, Lieutenant. Perhaps you could clarify the nature of these searches." Foster's expression cooled noticeably. "This is a military matter regarding reservation boundaries, sir. I'm not at liberty to discuss the details with civilians." "Of course," Blackwell conceded with a thin smile. "However, as Miss Mitchell's legal representative, I must insist on being present during any search of her property." The 2 men locked eyes in a silent battle of wills that Sarah observed with growing unease. Foster clearly resented Blackwell's interference, while Blackwell seemed determined to insert himself into the lieutenant's investigation, whether out of genuine concern for Sarah's interests or to discover any connection between her and Ashki remained unclear. "Very well," Foster agreed finally. "You may observe, but my men will conduct the search according to military protocol." As the soldiers spread out across her property, Sarah remained on the porch, caught between these 2 dangerous men and their competing agendas. The Eaglestone felt heavy in her pocket, a reminder of yet another force at work in this increasingly complex situation. 3 nights until the full moon. 3 nights to survive this dangerous convergence of threats. 3 nights until whatever plan Ashki and his people had set in motion would reveal itself. Sarah could only hope their solution would arrive before either Blackwell or Foster discovered the truth that somewhere in the labyrinth of passages beneath the desert, an injured Navajo elder held evidence that could destroy not only her father, but potentially the corrupt system that empowered men like Foster to enforce unjust laws against people who had inhabited these lands for countless generations before. White settlers arrived. Foster's second search proved even more thorough than the first. His men dismantled Sarah's root cellar, probed every floorboard, and examined each piece of furniture for hidden compartments. They extended their investigation to the chicken coop, the small barn housing her cow and mule, and even the outhouse. At the property's edge, all while Blackwell observed with calculating eyes, noting every detail of the homestead and the military's procedures. When the soldiers finally discovered the loose stones beneath Sarah's hearth, her hastily created hiding place after Key's warning, Foster's triumph was palpable. Yet the space contained only her meager savings and a locked box holding her land deed and personal correspondence. Of the fugitive medicine man or the mysterious ledgers, there was no sign. Quite the elaborate hiding place for ordinary documents. "Miss Mitchell," Foster remarked, turning the brass key to her lockbox between his fingers. "A woman alone must take precautions, Lieutenant," Sarah replied evenly, extending her hand for the key. "Especially in territory where law enforcement seems more concerned with harassing homesteaders than protecting them." Foster returned the key with obvious reluctance. "My men will continue searching the surrounding area. The medicine man is injured and couldn't have traveled far without assistance." His gaze lingered meaningfully on her face. "Someone in this region is helping him evade capture. Perhaps he's simply more resourceful than you give him credit for," Sarah suggested, unable to resist the small defiance, despite Blackwell's warning glance from across the room. Foster's expression hardened. "Native resourcefulness is precisely what reservation boundaries are designed to contain, Miss Mitchell. Those who disregard such boundaries, or assist others in doing so, undermine the very civilization they claim to represent." With that parting admonition, Foster ordered his men to withdraw, their search expanding outward from the homestead in widening circles. Sarah watched from her window as they methodically combed the surrounding terrain, their blue uniforms stark against the desert landscape. "You seem remarkably unconcerned about military personnel ransacking your home," Blackwell observed once they were alone. He stood by her hearth, studying the disturbed stones with evident curiosity. "Most women would be distressed by such an invasion. Most women haven't spent 3 years defending their land against everything from rustlers to flash floods," Sarah countered. "Lieutenant Foster's suspicions are merely the latest challenge to overcome." Blackwell turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "What exactly does he suspect you of, Miss Sarah?" "Harboring a Navajo fugitive seems rather specific. The lieutenant's imagination exceeds his evidence," she replied carefully. "He found an injured man's horse near my property and leapt to conclusions that suited his preconceptions about native criminals and sympathetic settlers." Indeed, Blackwell's tone suggested he found the situation more intriguing than he was willing to admit. "A curious coincidence, this manhunt coinciding with my arrival on your father's behalf." Sarah busied herself restoring order to the cabin, refusing to meet his searching gaze. "The territories are full of coincidences, Mr. Blackwell. Prospectors stumble upon silver while searching for water. Cattle thieves encounter rattlesnakes in the very moment of their crimes. Military officers pursue their obsessions, while more worthy matters remain unaddressed." Blackwell smiled thinly at her evasion. "Your father always lamented your wasted potential in law, Miss Sarah. You have a remarkable talent for addressing questions without answering them." He moved toward the door. "I'll return to my camp and allow you to continue your reflections on my offer. Remember, 2 days remain before I require your decision." After Blackwell's departure, Sarah spent the remainder of the day repairing the damage from Foster's search. As she worked, her mind circled endlessly through her limited options. Blackwell would never leave without the ledgers or without her, preferably both. Foster would not abandon his pursuit of Ashkee, especially now that his military pride was engaged. And somewhere beyond her perception, Ashkee's people were planning something involving the full moon, something that might offer escape from this impossible situation. As twilight deepened into night, Sarah sat on her porch, watching the waxing moon rise over the eastern mesas. Tomorrow night it would be full, coinciding with the deadline of Blackwell's ultimatum. Whatever Ashkee and his people intended would need to occur before Blackwell forced her hand. A flicker of movement at the edge of her property caught her. Attention, not the disciplined patrol of soldiers or the watchful presence of Blackwell's men, but something more fluid, more at home in the desert darkness. Sarah remained perfectly still, straining her eyes against the gathering shadows. There, a figure moving with remarkable stealth between patches of scrub brush, approaching her homestead from the west. Years of homesteading had taught Sarah when to seek safety and when to stand her ground. This nocturnal visitor, she sensed, posed no immediate threat. She waited, one hand resting on the rifle that never left her side after dark, as the figure drew closer. Ki Yazi materialized from the darkness with the same preternatural silence he had displayed during his previous visit. He paused at the edge of Sarah's porch, his expression grave in the moonlight. "You sent message," he said without preamble. "Grandfather has read it." "Your people still watch my homestead?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Ki nodded, his dark eyes scanning the surrounding terrain. "Always. We see soldiers search, see other men come, men from the east with hard eyes." "My father sent them to take me back," Sarah explained. "They want the ledges Ashki has protected." Grandfather suspected this. Ki reached into the folds of his clothing and produced a small bundle wrapped in the same woven cloth that had contained the blue cornmeal bread. "He sends this, says you will understand when the time comes." Sarah accepted the bundle, feeling its surprising weight. "What happens at the full moon? What was your message trying to tell me?" Ki's expression revealed nothing as he replied, "Tomorrow when moon rises full, our people gather for healing ceremony. Very powerful medicine. Grandfather says you must be there." "How?" "Blackwell's men watch my every move. Lieutenant Foster patrols the area constantly." A hint of a smile touched Ki's features. "White eyes see only what they expect to see. They look for Navajo man on Navajo horse. They do not look for white woman dressed as our people, riding with hunting party." Sarah blinked in surprise. "You expect me to disguise myself as Navajo? That would never work. My appearance. Grandfather says you have spirit of eagle, sees far, flies between two worlds." Ki gestured toward the bundle in her hands. "All you need is there. When sun touches western mountains tomorrow, be ready at Waterstones where messages pass between us. Hunters will come for late deer. You will go with them." Before Sarah could question him further, Ki had receded into the darkness, his departure as silent as his arrival. She sat motionless for several minutes, processing his instructions and the audacious plan they implied. Disguising herself as Navajo to slip past both Blackwell's surveillance and Foster's patrols seemed impossible, perhaps even offensive to the very people offering her sanctuary. Yet what choice did she have? In 2 days, Blackwell would force her return to Philadelphia to face her father's manipulation or his vengeance. Foster's suspicions would eventually lead to some form of legal action against her. The homestead she had built with years of backbreaking labor would be lost either way. Inside her cabin, Sarah unwrapped the bundle by lamplight. It contained a folded garment of dark wool, a traditional Navajo woman's dress, along with a hair, tie, soft moccasins, and a small pot of what appeared to be dark pigment. Beneath these lay something that made her breath catch, a folded paper bearing her father's official letterhead. With trembling fingers, Sarah unfolded the document to find a letter written in Judge Mitchell's unmistakable hand, addressed to the territorial governor. Its contents confirmed her worst fears about her father's far-reaching influence. "My dear Governor Wilson, I write to request your assistance in a delicate family matter. My daughter, Sarah, suffering from feminine melancholia following her fiancé's untimely death, fled Philadelphia under the influence of these disturbed perceptions. Recent information suggests she has established residence in Arizona Territory under false pretenses. My agent, Thomas Blackwell, travels to retrieve her and certain family documents she removed in her confused state." Any assistance your office can provide in expediting her return to proper medical care would be greatly appreciated. The bearer of this letter is authorized to act with my full legal authority in this matter. With deepest respect, Judge William. Mitchell, the letter was dated just 3 months earlier, proof that her father had never stopped searching for her, never abandoned his determination to silence the evidence of his corruption. More disturbing still was the fabricated story of mental illness and a non-existent fiancé, crafted to discredit any accusations she might make. With this document, Blackwell could secure the territorial governor's cooperation in forcing her return east, regardless of her wishes. Even if she destroyed her father's ledgers, her knowledge of their contents remained a threat he would never allow to exist beyond his control. The Navajo disguise no longer seemed improbable. It had become her only hope of escape. The following day passed with excruciating slowness. Sarah maintained her normal routines under Blackwell's distant surveillance, tending her garden and animals, while preparing for a departure she could not openly acknowledge. What few valuables she possessed were carefully hidden in a sack buried beneath her chicken coop, her mother's locket, her land deed, and the small cache of coins that represented her entire savings. If she survived the night's desperate gamble, perhaps she could someday retrieve them. As afternoon waned, Sarah noted increased activity around Foster's camp. Riders departed in various directions, suggesting the lieutenant had expanded his search area in a final push to locate Ashkey before. Darkness fell. This unexpected development might work in her favor, spreading the military presence thinner across the territory. Blackwell, too, seemed restless. Twice she observed him riding the perimeter of her property, studying the terrain with the methodical attention of a man planning for contingencies. His 3 companions maintained their positions near the creek, but their alertness had visibly intensified as the deadline for Sarah's decision approached. When the sun finally touched the western horizon, casting long shadows across her homestead, Sarah enacted the first stage of her plan. Carrying her water buckets as usual, she made her way to the cistern, ostensibly to collect the evening's supply. There, partially concealed by the deepening shadows, she quickly uncovered the small opening Key had described, a narrow passage. Beneath the cistern's stone foundation that appeared to descend into darkness, the sound of approaching hoofbeats froze her in place. Peering around the cistern, she saw Blackwell riding directly toward her position, his expression suggesting this was no routine patrol, but a deliberate intercept. "Miss Sarah," he called as he drew near. "A moment of your time, if you please." Sarah straightened, leaving her water buckets beside the cistern and moving to meet him, careful to position herself between Blackwell and the concealed passage entrance. "I was just finishing my evening chores, Mr. Blackwell," she replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Has something changed regarding our arrangement?" Blackwell dismounted, his movements deliberate as he secured his horse to a nearby fence post. "Lieutenant Foster's sudden enthusiasm for searching the western canyons struck me as potentially significant," he said, studying her face closely. Almost as if he had received new information about his fugitive's whereabouts. "The lieutenant doesn't share his intelligence with me," Sarah replied, "nor would I expect him to." "No," Blackwell agreed, his tone deceptively casual. "But I couldn't help noticing your interest in this particular water source throughout the day. 4 visits since noon by my count." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. He had been watching more closely than she realized. "The garden requires extra water during hot spells. Surely even in Philadelphia they understand basic agriculture." "Indeed." Blackwell took a step closer, his gaze shifting briefly to the cistern behind her. "Yet I find myself wondering what else might interest a judge's daughter in a simple water cache. Perhaps something hidden, something exchanged." Before Sarah could formulate a response, A distant sound interrupted their confrontation, the distinctive, drum-like rhythm of multiple horses approaching at speed from the direction of the western mesas. Both turned to see a group of mounted Navajo hunters emerging from the evening shadows, their silhouettes dark against the reddening sky. The hunting party rode directly toward the homestead, 4 warriors with rifles across their saddles, their expressions impassive beneath wide-brimmed hats adorned with trade beads and hawk feathers. Behind them trailed 2 riderless horses, one laden with what appeared to be a recently killed deer. "Friends of yours?" Blackwell inquired, his hand sliding subtly toward the revolver at his hip. "I've had peaceful dealings with the Navajo," Sarah replied, her mind racing. "They occasionally trade venison for coffee or salt." Blackwell's gaze never left the approaching riders. Curious timing for a social visit, wouldn't you say? Almost as if they expected to find you here at this specific moment. Before Sarah could respond, the hunting party reached them. The lead rider, a broad-shouldered man with striking facial tattoos that marked him as a warrior of some status, regarded Blackwell with open suspicion before addressing Sarah in the Navajo language. "I don't speak your tongue," Sarah replied, hoping her planned rendezvous remained salvageable despite Blackwell's presence. The warrior switched to heavily accented English. "We bring meat, trade for coffee beans." His dark eyes flickered briefly to the cistern before returning to Sarah's face, a subtle signal that confirmed these were indeed Key's promised escorts. "I appreciate the offer," Sarah began carefully, "but as you can see, I'm engaged with another visitor at the moment." Blackwell stepped forward, assuming the authoritative manner that had intimidated countless individuals across Philadelphia society. "Thomas Blackwell, representing Judge William Mitchell of the Pennsylvania Circuit Court. May I inquire as to your business on this property?" The warrior assessed Blackwell with the measured calculation of someone accustomed to evaluating threats. "We hunt, bring trade." He gestured toward the deer. "No trespass on woman's land. Stand where Diné people always stood." "Of course," Blackwell replied smoothly, though Sarah detected the tension beneath his polite facade. "However, Miss Mitchell is preparing to return east with me. She won't be requiring provisions." The warrior's expression remained unchanged, but Sarah noticed the subtle shift in the other hunters' postures, a tightening of hands on rifle stocks, an alertness that hadn't been present moments before. "Woman rides east?" the warrior asked, looking to Sarah for confirmation. The question presented an unexpected opportunity. If she could somehow communicate her situation to these men without alerting Blackwell, they might still provide the escape. Key had promised. "Mr. Blackwell represents my father," Sarah explained carefully. "He believes I should return to Philadelphia, though I've expressed my preference to remain on my homestead." Understanding flickered in the warrior's eyes. "Fathers, words travel far," he observed. "Reach daughter even in desert." He dismounted with fluid grace, handing his reins to one of his companions before approaching Sarah with measured steps. From within his buckskin jacket, he withdrew a folded piece of paper. "Woman reads message from trading post. Tell what it says." Sarah accepted the paper, recognizing the ploy for what it was, a pretext to communicate something without Blackwell's understanding. The paper contained a crude map drawn in charcoal, showing her homestead, the cistern, and a series of markings that appeared to indicate a path leading westward. "It's directions to the trading post," she improvised for Blackwell's benefit. "Mr. Willis wants to know if I need supplies before winter." The warrior nodded. "You bring answer now? We wait." He gestured toward the homestead, clearly suggesting Sarah should retrieve something from inside. Blackwell's suspicion was palpable. "I'm afraid Miss Mitchell is rather occupied at present. Perhaps you gentlemen could return tomorrow." "Moon full tonight," the warrior replied, pointing toward the eastern horizon where the moon had begun its ascent. "Good hunting only with full moon. Tomorrow too late." Sarah seized the opening. "It will only take a moment, Mr. Blackwell. I should at least write a response to Mr. Willis explaining my change in circumstances." She took a step toward her cabin before adding, "You're welcome to accompany me, of course." Blackwell hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave the Navajo hunters unobserved, yet equally unwilling to allow Sarah out of his sight. After a moment's calculation, he nodded tersely. "Lead the way, Miss Mitchell." As they walked the short distance to her cabin, Sarah's mind worked furiously to formulate a plan. The bundle Key had delivered, the disguise she was meant to use, lay hidden beneath a loose floorboard near her bed. With Blackwell watching her every move, she had no hope of retrieving it undetected. "You seem unusually accommodating to native customs," Blackwell observed as they reached her door. "Most settlers maintain a more cautious distance." "Isolation changes one's perspective on hospitality," Sarah replied, lighting the lamp inside her cabin. "When your nearest white neighbor is 5 miles distant, you learn to navigate relationships with whoever inhabits the surrounding land." Blackwell remained in the doorway, positioning himself to observe both Sarah and the Navajo hunters waiting by the cistern. "Navigate relationships," he repeated thoughtfully. "An interesting choice of words for interactions with people most consider savages." Sarah located paper and pencil, her movements deliberately unhurried as she crafted a response to the fictional inquiry from the trading post. "I've found the Navajo to be no more savage than certain civilized men of my acquaintance," she replied, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "They at least make no pretense about their intentions." "And what do you believe their intentions are tonight, Miss Sarah?" Blackwell asked, his tone deceptively mild. 4 armed warriors arriving at dusk, coincidentally when your decision regarding your father's offer is due?" Sarah met his gaze directly. "They came to trade, Mr. Blackwell, a concept familiar even in Philadelphia, I believe." Before he could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats once again interrupted their exchange. Sarah moved to the window to see 2 military scouts riding hard toward the homestead from the eastern trail. Behind them, in the distance, she could make out the dust cloud that suggested Foster's main force was not far behind. The Navajo hunters had also noticed the approaching soldiers. They remounted with practiced efficiency, the leader making a sharp gesture toward the western horizon before the group wheeled their horses and rode swiftly away from the homestead. "It seems Lieutenant Foster has returned at an inopportune moment." "For your trading partners," Blackwell observed dryly. "Rather remarkable how quickly they departed." Sarah's heart sank as she watched her chance at escape disappearing with the retreating hunters. "The Navajo avoid military patrols whenever possible," she said, trying to mask her disappointment. "History has taught them the wisdom of caution when dealing with bluecoats." The military scouts reined in before Sarah's cabin, dust swirling around their lathered mounts. "Miss Mitchell," the corporal called urgently. "Lieutenant Foster requests you remain indoors. We've tracked the fugitive medicine man to the canyons west of here. There may be armed Navajo in the area." Blackwell stepped onto the porch. "Has there been violence, Corporal?" "No, sir, but the lieutenant believes they're gathering for some purpose, perhaps a raid on settlements." The young soldier's expression betrayed his nervousness. "Best if civilians stay secured until we determine their intentions." Sarah followed Blackwell outside, clinging to a desperate hope that the situation might somehow still work to her advantage. "Surely Lieutenant Foster doesn't believe a few hunters constitute a war party," she protested. "They were just here, trading venison." The corporal's eyes widened. "Navajo were here, at your homestead." He turned in his saddle, gesturing urgently to his companion. "Ride back to the lieutenant. Tell him we've confirmed native presence at the Mitchell homestead within the last hour." The second scout departed immediately, spurring his horse toward Foster's approaching column. The corporal remained, his rifle now held at the ready as he scanned the surrounding terrain. "Please go inside, Miss Mitchell. We'll establish a perimeter." around your property. Sarah felt the walls of her carefully constructed life closing in. Foster would use the hunter's presence to justify a military occupation of her homestead. Blackwell would use the ensuing chaos to force her departure. And the Navajo, her only potential allies in this impossible situation, had been driven away by the very forces conspiring against her. As darkness settled fully over the landscape, Foster arrived with 20 mounted soldiers. They established camp on the flat ground between Sarah's homestead and Blackwell's position by the creek, effectively cutting off any potential route of escape. Foster himself approached Sarah's cabin, his manner suggesting he considered this development a personal victory. "Your Navajo friends led us on quite a chase today, Miss Mitchell," he announced without preamble. "Curious how they seemed to vanish into the canyons, only to reappear at your doorstep hours later." "They came to trade," Sarah repeated wearily. "As they occasionally do with several homesteads in the region," Foster smiled thinly. "Indeed, and now they've retreated to the western mesas, where my scouts report unusual activity around several cave entrances." He removed his gloves deliberately. "Activity that suggests a gathering of some significance, perhaps centered around our fugitive medicine man." "I wouldn't know anything about that," Sarah replied, conscious of Blackwell listening intently from his position near the door. "No?" Foster raised an eyebrow. "Then you won't object to remaining under military protection tonight, for your safety, of course." His gaze shifted to Blackwell. "You and your men are welcome to shelter within our perimeter as well, Mr. Blackwell. These hills can become dangerous after dark." Blackwell inclined his head slightly. "Most generous, Lieutenant. However, my men are quite capable of maintaining our own security." An unspoken communication passed between the two men, mutual distrust veiled behind frontier courtesy. Sarah recognized the delicate balance of power at play. Foster had no legal authority to detain Blackwell or his men, just as Blackwell could not openly challenge the military's presence on territorial land. "As you wish," Foster conceded. Turning back to Sarah, his tone hardened. "No one enters or leaves this homestead tonight without my personal authorization. Is that understood, Miss Mitchell?" Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As the men withdrew to their respective positions, she closed her door and leaned against it, momentarily overwhelmed by the trap that had closed around her. The full moon now hung above the eastern horizon, its silver light streaming through her window, to illuminate the small cabin she had fought so hard to establish. According to Key, somewhere in the western canyons, Ashkey and his people were gathering for a healing ceremony. A ceremony she was meant to attend, bearing the eagle stone and whatever guidance the elder wished to provide regarding her father's ledgers. Instead, she sat imprisoned in her own home, surrounded by armed men representing the various forms of authority she had fled 3 years earlier. The bitter irony was not lost on her. In seeking freedom from her father's control, she had merely exchanged one form of confinement for another. As the night deepened, Sarah extinguished her lamp and sat in darkness by her window, watching the military camp and the distant position of Blackwell's men. The moon climbed higher, bathing the landscape in ethereal light that transformed the familiar terrain into something almost otherworldly. It was then that she noticed it, a shadow moving against the silver-washed ground, approaching her homestead. Not from the west, where the hunters had retreated, but from the north, using the deep shadows cast by her small barn for cover. The figure moved with such stealth that the sentries posted around her property gave no indication of awareness. Sarah remained perfectly still, barely breathing as the shadow reached the rear of her cabin. A soft scratching sound at her back. And Doctor confirmed what she had begun to hope. Against all odds, someone had penetrated the military cordon. Moving silently across the room, Sarah unbarred the door just enough to allow entry. The figure that slipped through the narrow opening was not Key, as she had expected, but a Navajo woman, perhaps a few years older than herself. dressed in the same style of clothing contained in the bundle Sarah had hidden beneath her floor. "Quickly," the woman whispered in perfect English, closing the door behind her. "We haven't much time." "Who are you?" Sarah whispered, straining to see the woman's features in the darkness of her cabin. "I am Nijoni, daughter of Ashki." The woman replied, her voice barely audible above the night sounds filtering through the walls. "My brother Ki sent me when the soldiers prevented the hunters from bringing you to ceremony." Sarah's eyes had adjusted enough to make out Nijoni's face, strong-boned and dignified, with intelligent eyes that assessed their surroundings with practiced efficiency. Unlike Ki, who carried himself with a warrior's alertness, Nijoni moved, with the quiet assurance of a healer, someone accustomed to navigating between life and death with steady hands. "How did you get past the soldiers?" Sarah asked, peering through the window at the military camp, where no alarm had been raised. A brief smile touched Nijoni's lips. "Your bluecoats watch for men on horses, not women who crawl like snakes through grass." She gestured toward Sarah's clothing. "We must hurry." "The ceremony begins when the moon touches the tallest peak." "It's impossible," Sarah protested quietly. "There are 20 soldiers outside, not to mention Blackwell's men. Every approach to this cabin is watched." Nijoni moved to the center of the room, her expression revealing nothing of the urgency she clearly felt. "Do you have the stone my father gave you? The eagle?" Sarah retrieved the carved talisman from her pocket, its smooth surface warm against her palm despite the cool night. "Yes, but—" "And the bundle he sent with instructions, hidden beneath the floor," Sarah confirmed, moving to the loose board where she had concealed the disguise. As she knelt to retrieve it, a sharp knock at her front door froze both women. "In place. Miss Mitchell?" Lieutenant Foster's voice carried clearly through the wooden barrier. "A moment of your time, if you please." Sarah gestured frantically for Nijoni to conceal herself in the small storage space adjacent to the main room. The Navajo woman slipped silently through the narrow doorway as Sarah smoothed her skirts and moved to answer Foster's summons. "Lieutenant," she greeted him with forced composure, "what brings you to my door at this hour?" Foster stood on her porch, silhouetted against the military campfires burning beyond. "My sentries reported movement around your cabin. I thought it prudent to verify your security personally." Sarah maintained a neutral expression despite her racing heart. "As you can see, I'm quite alone. Perhaps your men glimpsed my shadow through the window as I prepared for bed." Foster's gaze swept the visible portion of her cabin with unconcealed suspicion. "Perhaps, though shadows rarely move with purpose." He shifted his weight, hand resting casually on his holstered revolver. "May I come in, Miss Mitchell? A brief inspection would set my mind at ease." The request, phrased as a courtesy but delivered as a command, left Sarah with little choice. Refusing would only confirm his suspicions and potentially provoke a forcible search. She stepped aside, allowing Foster entry while praying Nijoni had found adequate concealment. Foster moved deliberately through the small space, his trained eye missing nothing. When he approached the storage area where Nijoni had disappeared, Sarah fought to keep her breathing steady. "Your hospitality toward native visitors interests me, Miss Mitchell," Foster remarked, pausing before the closed storage door. "Most settlers maintain appropriate distance from the reservation inhabitants, yet you engage in regular trade, according to your own account." "I find pragmatism serves better than prejudice in matters of survival," Sarah replied, striving for a casual tone despite the danger. "The Navajo know this land better than any recent arrival. Their knowledge of local plants, weather patterns, and water sources has proven invaluable." Foster turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Knowledge that might extend to hidden pathways? Underground passages, places where, say, a fugitive medicine man might conceal himself?" The pointed nature of his question confirmed what Sarah had suspected. Foster knew, or strongly suspected, the existence of the cave network that had allowed Ashkey to vanish so completely. What he lacked was proof and specific knowledge of access. In points, the Navajo don't share their sacred sites with outsiders, Sarah answered truthfully. Nor would I expect them to. Foster nodded slowly, his attention returning to the storage door. What do you keep in there, Miss Mitchell? Preserved food, extra blankets, tools, the usual provisions for winter, Sarah replied, moving subtly to position herself between Foster and the door. Nothing that would interest the military, I assure you. I'll be the judge of that, Foster stated, reaching past her for the latch. In that moment, a commotion erupted outside, shouting from the military camp, followed by a single rifle shot that cracked through the night air. Foster's head snapped toward the sound, his military training immediately overriding his suspicions about Sarah's storage room. Stay inside, he ordered sharply, drawing his revolver as he moved swiftly to the front door. Bar this behind me. As he disappeared into the night, Sarah quickly secured the door before rushing to the storage area. Nijoni emerged, calm despite their narrow escape. Your soldiers have seen the signal fires, she explained, moving to the window to observe the activity in the camp. My people lit them on the western ridges to draw attention away from the ceremony site. Sarah joined her at the window, watching as Foster organized his men into search parties, directing them toward the distant pinpoints of light visible on the rocky outcroppings. They won't all go, she observed. He'll leave guards around the homestead. 4 men remain, Nijoni confirmed, counting the soldiers still visible in the camp, and the eastern men still watch from the creek. She turned to Sarah, her expression resolute. Now we must prepare you. The path we take requires stealth and speed. Sarah retrieved the hidden bundle from beneath the floor, unwrapping the Navajo dress and accompanying items Key had delivered. I still don't understand how this disguise will work. I look nothing like your people. The night obscures many differences, Nijoni replied, taking the dark pigment from the bundle. This will darken your skin enough for shadows to do the rest. But it is not only appearance that betrays outsiders, it is movement, the way you carry yourself on the land. As Nijoni applied the pigment to Sarah's face and hands with practiced efficiency, she spoke in low tones, instructing her on the specific posture and gait expected of a Navajo woman. Keep your eyes downcast when soldiers look toward you. Women of my people do not challenge men with direct gaze. Move steadily, neither hurried nor hesitant. Belong to the land beneath your feet, and questioning eyes will slide past you. The transformation was more involved than Sarah had anticipated. Her hair, several shades too light, was covered with a dark cloth in the Navajo style. The dress, woven of wool dyed deep indigo, hung differently than her settler clothing, requiring adjustments to her normal movements. The soft moccasins made her footfalls nearly silent, but demanded a different walking pattern than her worn leather boots. The eagle stone, Nijoni instructed. Keep it against your skin, beneath the dress. Its protection extends only to those who carry it with respect. Sarah secured the carving as directed, still skeptical of its supposed powers, but unwilling to dismiss anything that might aid their escape. What about Blackwell's men? They're watching the property from the creek side. The eastern men are. Surrounded, though they do not know it, Nijoni replied with quiet confidence. My brother and his hunters have positions in the shadows. When the moment comes to move, they will ensure no alarm is raised. A chill ran through Sarah at the implication. You won't hurt them? Nijoni's expression remained neutral. That depends on their choices. We prefer silence to bloodshed, but we will protect our people, including you if you come with us. The enormity of what Sarah was contemplating suddenly struck her with full force. She was preparing to abandon her homestead, 3 years of backbreaking work and hard-won independence, to flee with people she barely knew to an uncertain future. Yet the alternative, Capture by Blackwell, return to her father's control, the suffocating confines of Philadelphia society, was unthinkable. "What about my father's ledgers?" she asked, remembering the true catalyst for her flight 3 years earlier. "Ashki still has them." "They are safe," Nijoni assured her. "My father will explain when we reach the ceremony. Now we must focus on leaving this place unseen." Sarah took a final look around the cabin that had been her home and sanctuary. So much of herself had been poured into these walls, this small plot of hard-won land. Leaving it felt like abandoning a part of her identity. Yet in truth, the homestead had become as much a prison as a refuge these past days, surrounded by men representing the very authorities she had fled. "I'm ready," she said finally, squaring her shoulders beneath the unfamiliar weight of the Navajo dress. Nijoni nodded approval. "We leave through Waterstones. The passage beneath leads to canyon where others wait." She moved to the back door, listening intently for several moments, before easing it open just enough to survey the terrain between the cabin and the cistern. The yard lay bathed in moonlight, the 4 remaining soldiers clearly visible at their posts around the perimeter Foster had established. None were stationed directly behind the cabin, a tactical oversight that suggested Foster had not truly expected trouble from that direction. "Now," Nijoni whispered, slipping out the door in a fluid motion that seemed to merge with the shadows. Sarah followed, consciously adjusting her movements to match the instructions she had received. Back straight, steps measured, eyes aware but never lingering too long on any single point. Together they moved across the open ground, using the deeper shadows cast by outbuildings where possible, but ultimately relying more on deliberate purpose than concealment. The strategy proved remarkably effective. One soldier glanced in their direction, but his gaze passed over the 2 Navajo women without registering their significance. To his military mind, trained to watch for specific threats, they registered merely as native women going about their business, unexpected but not inherently suspicious in territory where indigenous people still moved freely despite reservation boundaries. They reached the cistern without challenge, Nijoni immediately kneeling to locate the hidden entrance that had so fascinated Blackwell earlier that day. Sarah cast one final glance toward her cabin, its silhouette a darker shadow against the night sky. "No looking back," Nijoni murmured, correctly interpreting Sarah's hesitation. "The eagle flies forward only." Sarah nodded, turning her attention to the task at hand. Nijoni had removed several stones from the cistern's base, revealing an opening barely large enough for an adult to pass through. Beyond lay darkness, the faint scent of damp earth rising. "From the hidden passage." "I go first," Nijoni instructed. "Follow close. Touch wall with left hand always. Many branches in tunnel, easy to become lost." She slipped into the opening with practiced ease, disappearing into the blackness below. Sarah hesitated only momentarily before following, lowering herself into the narrow shaft that angled steeply downward into the earth. The passage was tight, forcing her to crawl in places, the rough stone walls scraping against her shoulders despite her careful movements. Darkness enveloped her completely once the entrance was several yards behind, a primal blackness untouched by moon or stars. "Keep moving." Nijoni's voice floated back to her, calm and assured in the suffocating darkness. Passage widens ahead. As promised, the tunnel gradually expanded until Sarah could stand upright, though she had to stoop slightly to avoid the low ceiling. The absolute darkness remained disorienting, her world reduced to the sound of Nijoni's movements ahead and the rough stone beneath her left hand. "How far does this tunnel extend?" Sarah whispered, her voice sounding strange in the confined space. "Beneath mountains," Nijoni replied. "Ancient rivers carved paths long ago. My people found them, expanded some for ceremonies, for protection when enemies came. Few outsiders know they exist. They continued in silence for what felt like hours, but was likely only 20 minutes, the passage occasionally branching or changing direction. Sarah maintained contact with the left wall as instructed, trusting Nijoni's knowledge of this lightless labyrinth. The air grew noticeably cooler as they descended deeper into the earth, carrying hints of mineral scent Sarah couldn't identify. When light finally appeared ahead, a faint, flickering glow around a bend in the tunnel. Sarah felt a surge of relief so powerful her knees nearly buckled. The illumination grew stronger as they approached, revealing a larger chamber where a single torch burned in a wall sconce, tended by a figure Sarah immediately recognized. "You made it," Key observed, his expression revealing momentary surprise. As he took in Sarah's transformed appearance, "The disguise serves you well. I almost didn't recognize you." The soldiers remained distracted by the signal fires. Nijoni asked, accepting a water skin her brother offered. Key nodded. "Foster took most of his men west, chasing shadows. Those who stayed are watched. The eastern men by the creek are no longer a concern." Something in his tone made Sarah glance sharply at him. "You didn't. They sleep," Key assured her, correctly interpreting her concern. "Herbs in their water make dreams that last until morning. No blood was spilled." Sarah accepted the water skin when offered, the cool liquid soothing her dust-dry throat. "Where are we going from here? Where is Ashki?" "Grandfather waits at Ceremony Cave," Key replied, retrieving the torch from its holder. "Not far now, but we must hurry. Moon reaches proper position soon." With Key leading the way, torch held high to illuminate the uneven path. They continued through a series of increasingly large chambers connected by short passages. Evidence of human modification became more apparent. Steps carved into steeper sections, support beams in potentially unstable areas, small niches holding ceramic vessels of unknown purpose. "Many generations worked these passages," Nijoni explained, noting Sarah's interest in their surroundings. "Stories say our ancestors found refuge here when great drought came, when other tribes became enemies fighting for water and hunting." Grounds. The tunnel suddenly opened into a vast cavern whose ceiling disappeared into darkness above the torch's reach. The path descended in switchbacks along the cavern wall, leading to a floor where dozens of small fires burned in a circular pattern. Within that circle, figures moved in what appeared to be carefully choreographed movements, their shadows dancing against the stone walls in hypnotic patterns. As they began their descent toward the ceremony, Sarah felt the eagle stone warm against her skin, almost as if responding to their arrival at this sacred place. Below, among the gathered Navajo, waited Ashki and whatever wisdom he intended to share about her father's ledgers, knowledge that might finally free her from the past that had pursued her across a continent. The descent to the cavern floor seemed to transport Sarah across more than mere physical distance. Each step down the ancient pathway stripped away another layer of her settler identity, immersing her deeper into a world governed by rhythms and beliefs utterly foreign to her Eastern upbringing. The air grew warmer as they approached the ceremonial circle, carrying the mingled scents of burning sage, cedar, and unfamiliar herbs that created a sweet, earthy perfume unlike anything in Sarah's experience. Key led them around the outer edge of the gathering, where perhaps 40 Navajo people, men, women, and a few children, sat or stood in respectful silence. At the circle's center, Ashki knelt beside a small fire, his wounded side now showing no sign of the injury that had brought him to Sarah's doorstep a week earlier. He wore elaborate ceremonial garments adorned with intricate beadwork and silver, conchos that caught the firelight as he moved his hands in precise, practiced motions above an array of small objects arranged on a blanket before him. When he looked up and spotted their approach, a smile of genuine warmth transformed his weathered features. "Eagle woman," he greeted Sarah, using a name she had never heard but somehow recognized as meant for her. "You have crossed boundaries to join us." "She came through darkness without fear," Nijoni reported to her father, pride evident in her voice. "The disguise served her well." Ashki nodded, his dark eyes studying Sarah's transformed appearance with approval. "Shadows hide many differences, but the spirit cannot be disguised. Yours has the courage we suspected." He gestured for Sarah to join him by the central fire. "Come, there is much to share before dawn brings new challenges." Sarah approached hesitantly, acutely aware of the many eyes following her movement into the sacred space. Whatever trust Ashki and his children had extended to her clearly wasn't universally shared among the gathered tribe members. Their gazes held caution, assessment, and in some cases open suspicion. "Your people don't seem pleased by my presence," she observed quietly as she knelt across from Ashki. "My people have learned caution through generations of broken promises," the elder replied, "but they respect the eagle stone's choosing." He gestured toward Sarah's chest, where the carved talisman rested against her skin beneath the Navajo dress. "Such stones select their carriers. We merely recognize the connection." Before Sarah could question this cryptic statement, Ashki carefully unwrapped a bundle beside him, revealing her father's ledgers. The leather-bound books looked oddly out of place in this ancient cavern, symbols of a world governed by written law rather than spoken tradition. "These speak of corruption that reaches further than you knew," Ashki said, his fingers resting lightly on the topmost ledger. "Your father's greed extended beyond eastern cities to these very lands." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, a cold dread forming in her stomach. "These pages show payments to territorial officials, governor, Indian, agents, military officers, all to secure land rich with minerals that rightfully belongs to my people." Ashki opened one ledger to a page marked with a strip of woven cloth. "Your father never traveled west, but his influence secured stolen wealth for Eastern men who never touched the earth they plundered." Sarah leaned forward, recognizing her father's meticulous handwriting detailing transactions involving territorial land grants. The names listed as recipients included several she recognized: wealthy Philadelphia families with mining investments in Western territories. The officials receiving consultation fees included Hammond, the current Indian agent, and his predecessor. "These are dated nearly 5 years ago," she noted, scanning the entries. "Before I fled Philadelphia." Ashki nodded. "The corruption has deep roots. When reservation boundaries were redrawn 3 winters past, the new lines conveniently excluded lands where silver and copper lay beneath the soil." He turned another page, revealing a map with annotations in her father's hand. "Sacred sites of my people became property of mining companies through judges' rulings thousands of miles away." The revelation struck Sarah with physical force. Her father's corruption extended beyond manipulating local justice for wealthy friends. He had participated in the systematic theft of native lands, using his legal authority to facilitate the displacement of entire communities for financial gain. "I had no idea," she whispered, shame washing through her despite her personal innocence in these transactions. "When I took these ledgers, I only knew they contained evidence of judicial misconduct in Philadelphia." The Eaglestone recognized. "What you did not yet understand," Ashki replied. "It guided you west, to the very land your father helped steal, so truth could emerge." Sarah shook her head, struggling with this mystical interpretation of what she had considered a practical decision to flee as far from her father's influence as possible. "I chose the Arizona Territory because land was available through the Homestead Act. It was, coincidence." A hint of amusement touched Ashki's expression. "White people find comfort in coincidence, where my people see pattern. Either understanding serves the present purpose. He closed the ledger and regarded Sarah intently. What matters now is what happens with this knowledge. The military is searching for you, Sarah reminded him. Blackwell is determined to retrieve these ledgers for my father. What happens when dawn comes and they discover I'm gone? By sunrise we will all be elsewhere, Ashki assured her. The ceremony concludes with Moon's descent. Then we travel to meet with leaders of neighboring tribes who have suffered similar theft. These records will help unite our voices against those who rewrite boundaries to serve greed. The enormity of what Ashki proposed began to register in Sarah's mind. You intend to use these ledgers to challenge the territorial government's land policies, to protest the reservation boundaries. Truth is a powerful weapon against corruption, Ashki confirmed. Your father's own words prove what our people have claimed for years, that boundaries were drawn to steal resources, not to establish peace. But the authorities will never accept evidence stolen by a judge's fugitive daughter and presented by a medicine man who violated reservation boundaries, Sarah protested. They'll dismiss it without consideration. Key, who had been listening silently nearby, joined their conversation. Not if evidence goes to Washington newspapers, not if copies reach humanitarian groups in eastern cities. His English, more fluent than Sarah had initially realized, carried the confidence of education. Words that territorial officials can ignore become harder to dismiss when printed for all to see. Sarah considered this strategy with growing appreciation for its potential effectiveness. Public exposure had been her original, half-formed plan. When fleeing Philadelphia, before fear and isolation had narrowed her focus to mere survival, these people had developed a more comprehensive approach to using the damning information she had carried west. My father will deny everything, she cautioned. He'll claim the ledgers are forgeries, that I fabricated them out of personal vendetta. Which is why you must tell your story alongside the evidence, Nijoni interjected, joining them by the fire. A judge's daughter who abandoned privilege to flee corruption carries moral authority that strengthens the written proof. The implication stunned Sarah into momentary silence. They weren't simply asking to use her father's ledgers, they were inviting her to publicly stand against him, to become the voice that gave human context to the dry accounting of bribes and illegal transactions. You want me to openly oppose my father? To testify against him? The prospect was simultaneously terrifying and strangely liberating. Ashki raised his hand in a gesture that somehow combined reassurance with solemn purpose. We ask you to speak truth as you know it, nothing more, nothing less. The choice remains yours, as it has from the moment you sheltered a wounded stranger at your door. The ceremonial fires flickered in the still air of the cavern, casting constantly shifting shadows across the gathered faces. In their dancing light, Sarah saw expectation, hope, and determination. A community united in purpose despite the overwhelming forces aligned against them. If I agree, she said carefully, what happens next? Foster will label me a criminal for helping you escape. Blackwell will pursue me with even greater determination once he reports my disappearance to my father. The people have maintained secret paths through these mountains since before white men arrived, Ashki explained. We travel north to meet with Hopi and Ute leaders who face similar encroachment. From there, trusted allies will help carry our message to those who can amplify it. And me, what place could I possibly have among your people once this is done? The question revealed Sarah's deepest fear, that in abandoning her homestead, she had surrendered her last claim to any place in the world. Ashki's expression softened. The Eagle Stone chose you for a reason beyond delivering these records. Your path forward may surprise you in ways neither you nor I can foresee." He gestured toward the ceremonial circle where several elders had begun a low, rhythmic chant. "Tonight, you are welcome to witness our healing ceremony. Tomorrow, we travel together toward a future that honors truth above power." As if responding to some unspoken signal, the assembled tribal members formed a more cohesive circle around the central fires. Ashki rose with dignity that belied his recent injury, taking his place among the elders. Nijoni guided Sarah to a position in the outer circle, where she could observe without intruding on the sacred proceedings. The ceremony unfolded with hypnotic intensity over the next several hours, chanting that seemed to vibrate through the stone floor itself, ritual movements that mimicked natural forces, sharing of sacred substances that Sarah declined with respectful gestures Nijoni had taught her. Throughout, she remained conscious of her status as outsider, granted rare privilege, careful to maintain the respectful silence expected of witnesses. Near dawn, as the ceremony reached its culmination, Ashki approached Sarah with a small clay bowl containing a paste of dark minerals mixed with clear oil. With ceremonial deliberation, he drew a simple design on her forehead, an eagle in flight, rendered in a few economical strokes. "Eagle woman returns to the sky people," he intoned in Navajo, the words incomprehensible to Sarah, but somehow carrying meaning beyond literal translation. Switching to English, he added, "You carry truth between worlds now, neither fully of your father's people nor of mine, but a bridge between both." The gathered tribe members acknowledged this declaration with a single unified sound. Not quite approval, not quite acceptance, but recognition of a new reality that included this transformed woman in their collective journey. As the ceremony concluded, the tribe began efficient preparations for departure. Within an hour, the cavern that had hosted their sacred gathering was empty of all evidence that humans had congregated there. Sarah watched in amazement as decades of settler survival training were revealed as clumsy and obvious, compared to the Navajo ability to move through the landscape without leaving traces. "Lieutenant Foster will be organizing search parties by now," she observed to Key as they prepared to leave through a different tunnel than the one that had brought them to the ceremony. "Let him search," Key replied with quiet confidence. "He looks for people who no longer exist in the forms he expects to find." He gestured toward Sarah's disguise, the eagle symbol on her forehead, the transformation that went deeper than mere appearance. "The woman who sheltered my grandfather died when she chose to follow us through darkness. The homesteader Foster seeks vanished with the moon's descent." Sarah touched the eagle stone, warm against her skin, despite the cool morning air flowing through the cavern entrance ahead. "And who emerges with the dawn?" Key smiled, the first full, genuine smile she had seen from him. "That is the question that makes a journey worth undertaking." As they emerged from the cavern onto a high mesa miles from her former homestead, Sarah turned to view the landscape transformed by morning light. In the far distance, barely visible, smoke rose from what might have been her cabin, Foster destroying evidence of her presence, perhaps, or simple retribution for her perceived betrayal. She felt a momentary pang for the life she had built there, the independence she had treasured. Yet as she turned to join the column of Navajo, already moving northward along hidden trails, Sarah recognized that she carried her true independence within, the freedom to choose truth over safety, justice over convenience, courage over compliance. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the monumental task of challenging corruption that reached from Philadelphia courtrooms to Arizona territorial offices. Behind lay the ashes of a life that had ultimately become another form of hiding. The eagle stone pulsed once against her skin, then settled into comfortable warmth as Sarah Mitchell, daughter of a corrupt judge, former homesteader, newly christened Eagle Woman, took her first steps toward a future where boundaries between worlds might prove more permeable than either her father or Lieutenant Foster could imagine. Above, a golden eagle soared on thermal currents, rising from the warming desert floor, its shadow briefly touching the small column of travelers before it banked toward the sacred mountains that had witnessed the unfolding of countless human dramas. Across centuries, Sarah followed its flight until it disappeared into the sun's glare, carrying with it the final fragments of the woman she had once been. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.